So a very good afternoon, everybody, to this Galileo Commission lecture with Professor George Ellis. I'm going to begin just with a moment's silence in memory of the mathematical physicist and honorary member of the network, Sir John Polkinghorne, who was Professor of Mathematical Physics at Cambridge before he became a priest. And when Arthur Peacock won the Templeton Prize and it was given in Guildhall, I was actually sitting next to John, which I think was probably 2001. George is also a Templeton Prize laureate. And I thought to myself, you might well be next. And he was. So that was one memory of John. He gave many talks for us. So we'll just take a moment of silence to remember John. Thank you. One other story just about John, or in relation to John, was I had Lord Mackay of Clashfern speaking at an event, and it so happened that he was at Trinity College, Cambridge, reading maths at the same time as John and Sir Michael Atiyah. And he said, I was really no good at maths compared with them, so I thought I'd better go into the law. So there you are. Well, we're very pleased to have George Ellis with us this afternoon on this important philosophical topic of causation, extending Aristotle's 4 forms of causation. And as you'll have seen in the biography, George is a Professor Emeritus of Applied Mathematics at University of Cape Town. He's an alumnus of Cambridge from 1964, and he's been teaching around the world in various different places. He won the Templeton Prize in 2004 and is the author of many books, and you'll be able to follow up on his webpage, which I put out on the invitation. So it's a great delight to have you here, George, and we're really looking forward to your talk, and we've done a bit of practice, so it should all go smoothly. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here. Okay, here we go. So I want to talk about Aristotle's 4 forms of causation and how they're vital in the real world. Can you see that clearly?
Yeah, that's all good.
Okay. So what is important is that the natural world is made up of a hierarchy. At the bottom there are atoms, molecules, cells, tissues, organs, body systems, organisms, populations, communities, and the ecosystem. We can represent this in this way: particle physics, atomic physics, chemistry, biochemistry, cell biology, neurology, botany, zoology, physiology, psychology, sociology, economics, and politics. Now, this is the same one for the central nervous system: molecules, synapses, neurons, network maps, systems, and the central nervous system. And you get some pictures on the right of synapses, of the networks, and the central nervous system as a whole. This modular hierarchical structure enables function at each level. So the standard physics view is that causation is bottom-up. Particle physics underlies atomic chemistry, and causation is always in the upward direction. So microphysics underlies macrophysics, such as in the kinetic theory of gases. Physics underlies chemistry. One of the huge discoveries was the nature of the chemical bond. Physics and chemistry underlying the functioning of the brain, the wonderful discoveries of neuroscience, and so on. And the reductionist assumption is that this is all that happens. All the real action is at the physics level, which is interacting particles and fields. Everything else follows by upwards causation, is the reductionist assumption. And on this view, the mind is an epiphenomenon. It has no real causal powers. However, myself and a whole lot of other people insist that downward causation also takes place. And the theme of this talk is that it's enabled by Aristotelian causation. So downward causation takes place. For instance, epigenetics determines what happens in cell biology. Cell processes initiate cell cycles. The mind controls physiological events such as walking. So when you make your decision that you're going to walk, you decide you're going to move your muscles. As a result, electrons flow through your nerve cells in your muscles and you walk. And thoughts initiate the motions of electrons and atoms in this way. So downward causation is also taking place. Now, what I want to do is to say in Aristotle's 4 types of causation, the first one is efficient causation, and that is the dynamic effects that make things happen. This is same level causation. In the hierarchy, it takes place at the same level. And the classic example is it occurs at the underlying physical level through electron and proton interactions. And this is what physicists concentrate on. Down at the physical level, electrons and protons are interacting, and this is what causes the motion of my muscles when I move my arm. However, the claim that we make, myself, Dennis Noble, and others, is that efficient causation is not confined to the physics level. We were just looking at the hierarchy there. You've got the psychology, botany, all of these levels. What we claim is that efficient causation takes place at every level, from the underlying physics level to the psychological and social levels. And this is what Dennis Noble calls a principle of biological relativity. And he's written a wonderful book about that called Dance to the Tune of Life. Indeed, our view is that the existence of time level of efficient causation at each level is what defines the emergent levels. And so each of these levels here, psychology is defined by certain theories of psychology, botany, and physiology. There is same level causation at each of those levels, is the view that we take. So for example, smoking causes lung cancer is a very well established feature, as shown by Judeo-Pearl. At the sociology economics level, you've got smoking advertising and social pressure, which is the reason that a lot of people are smoking. Advertisers pay a lot of money to get people to smoke. At the psychological level, it's I enjoy smoking, and that's the issue, the fight between rationality, which says you shouldn't do it, and emotion, which says you do it. At the physiological level, this is where smoking caused lung cancer is a causal relation which has been very well established. At the cell biology level, you've got uncontrolled cell duplication taking place. At the gene regulatory networks, you've got protein production taking place based on the DNA code, and that is taking place in the way it is because smoking is taking place at the high level. At the macromolecular chemistry level, you've got regulatory molecules binding and conformal changes taking place. At the quantum chemistry level, molecules are bonding to give macromolecules. At the atomic physics level, atoms bind to give molecules. And at the particle physics level, electron and proton interactions are taking place. So unlike the physicists who say that the particle physics level is the only place where causation is taking place and the rest are epiphenomena, we say efficient causation takes place at every one of these levels. But it's driven in a downward way because none of this would be happening unless you were smoking. You've decided to smoke. That has been actually taking place because of a social pressure on you to a huge extent. That chains down and cause all the other things to take place. So our claim is that efficient causation takes place at every level, and it's driven in a downward way, but enabled in an upward way. Okay, then you get formal causation. This is the second of Aristotle's type of causation. And this is the way that the context within which effects happen shapes what happens. It's a form of downward causation due to the physical form of structures as well as the changes in high-level variables. And the form of structures set constraints on lower-level dynamics and so shapes their outcomes. And the key cases are network structures, voltage and ligand-gated ion channels, and homeostasis, which is the same as feedback control and which is the same as cybernetics. So I'll deal with those in turn. When you have a complex network, the details matter, and these are pictures of a digital computer. And what you've got there is you've got the chip there in the green, and that is made up out of all of these different components of the chip, a set of components, and they have detailed wiring. And the micro details, what is happening here is these circuits are channeling causation from this point to this point to this point. These all channel causation, and that's the constraints that are taking place because the shape of the wiring that takes place there. And the micro details essentially alter. If you rewire, you shift some of these wires to somewhere else, the thing is not going to work properly. And furthermore, for the physicists, normally physicists think of coarse graining to get high level behavior, as you do in the kinetic theory of gases. You cannot coarse grain what is going on in a computer to get high level. What you have to do is to black box it, which is a completely different kind of process. Now, the same is true in the brain. You've got these neurons connected by axons and dendrites, and these form a dense structure of interlocking neurons. And at a top level, these are different areas and so on. It is the details of these connections that matter. This is what makes you and I different from each other. It's what enables us to think and so on. So again, the shape here and the connections, it's the shape which is channeling connection as action potential chains, spike chains, go between the different neurons. So the secret lies in the connections, that is in the form of the brain. What happens there is you have electric spike channels enabled by ion channels. What happens is you have dendrites going to the nucleus, going down the axons, and a spike chain like that travels down them, and then it goes across a synapse like that to the next axons. So the brain is made of interconnected neurons, which is the formal cause, because it's the shape here again, which is the cause of what happens at the lower level. It channels the electrons to flow along that. So information flows from the dendrites to the nucleus, down to the axons, to the synapse, and then on. And this is, it goes to another neuron, and it's guided. It's the guided motion of electrons which is taking place. Now, the details that matter here is the following. This happens, the currents which is going here happens because electrons are flowing down there. The reason it happens is because there are ion channels between the outside and the inside of the axons, and these can be closed or open. And the voltage-gated ion channels, they close when the voltage at the resting potential, they are closed, and the ions, the sodium ions, cannot travel through. When the membrane is depolarized, the shape of the molecule changes and let voltage to go through, and it's the current flowing in and out which causes the spike channels to function. And so what is happening is ions are going in and out there, and as they do so, they chain along and cause these spike chains to go along. It takes place through these ion channels being closed and then opening, and they're responding to the electric potential across there. So this is all taking place according to the shape of this molecule. This enables logic to emerge from the underlying physics by conformational change, and that's one of the most marvelous things. Physics does not by itself, Maxwell's equations does not have logic in it, but this allows logic of the following form. If the rest potential has a certain value, then the channel is closed. If it doesn't have that form, then the channel is open. That's the basic logical construction that is enabled by the physics through the shape of the ion channel. And this is the actual shape of the ion channel. This is seeing from the side when it's closed, and this is viewing from the top when it's open, and there is the ion going through. So the key is the changing conformational shape of the protein ion channels. Hence, this is formal causation. The flowing and not flowing is caused by the form and by the shape of the form. And so this is a wonderful example of formal causation, which enables us to think. The third very important example of formal causation is feedback control or homeostasis. And this is fundamental to biology. You have a system state. You have a goal for that state and you have a comparator. And you compare them and then you send an error message round to a controller. And if the actual state is different from what it ought to be, you to change the controller, you change the system state, and you cycle around until you have the desired output. A classic example is a thermostat or a shower. In the shower, it is you who are the comparator. You compare what the system state is from what you want. The controller is the tap, and then you change it until you get what you want. This is fundamental to all of microbiology. Information throws round there information what the state is, and the information changes the controller. It's top-down action, because if you disconnect the parts, cut the part there, it won't work. So the system is connected so as to give the outcome. So there is the actual thermostat and air conditioning. It's got this structure, which is the formal cause. And this is what it looks like from the outside. You set it to your desired temperature. That's a top-down control. And it determines how fast molecules move in the room. So that is a classic example of downward causation. It's enabled by this shape there, going through to the heater there, which enables the whole thing to function. So this is another example of formal causation. So formal causation enables downward causation to take place. That's the first message from what I've been doing. The next stuff is material causation. And what Aristotle says is causation depends on the nature of the stuff on which efficient causation operates. So matter matters. This is the issue of what the lower level elements are out of which a structure is made. And so what is important is how do these lower level elements come into being? And biology, it involves downward causation through developmental processes and through adaptive selection in many contexts. So there are 4 different kinds of things which are really important here: metabolic processes, developmental processes, natural selection, and brain plasticity. So Dennis Noble has developed a multi-level model of the heart. And this is what it looks like. It's a computer model of the heart, which he models the cycles taking place. It takes place by downward causation between organs down to genes, and from proteins down to genes. And he's written beautifully about how downward causation is taking place, which enables the heart to pump. The point about this is that it is the pumping of the heart which keeps the cells in our bodies alive. If the heart stops the pumping, our cells die within the matter of minutes, and we die ourselves. So this is a case of downward causation enabling the cells at the bottom level to live. So formal causation is what are the things which make the thing up. Human bodies are made of cells. Cells are enabled to be kept alive by downward causation through the heart. That's the first really important kind of thing. This is a case of metabolism. The heart and the lungs are providing with the cells with the materials they need to function. The second case is one of the wonderful discoveries, developmental biology and homeobox genes. Now, this thing is every cell in our body has got the same DNA. And cells are born being pluripotent. They're not any particular kind of cell, but basically they are told what kind of cells to become by gene regulatory networks using positional information. Incidentally, this was discovered by Lewis Wolpert, a South African who died about a week ago. Homeobox genes control other genes hierarchically. This determines cell types according to position in the developing body, and that is material causation because it's determining what types of cells occur. And so you start off with an embryo, and different clusters are controlled by different genes, and this develops into this body here. These parts become those bodies there, and precisely the same kind of thing happens in mice and in human beings. It's shared across many species. Our skeleton is developed in precisely the same kind of way by homeobox genes, determining what will happen to cells in our body and where they will become bones and where not. So developmental biology is a wonderful topic. The next absolutely fundamental form of downward causation of material causation is adaptive selection. The notional picture is the following. You have an ensemble of stuff here, and you have a selective gate. And this selective gate only lets certain stuff through, and that takes a disordered system and produce an ordered system out of it. That's the notional picture. Meaningful information is gained by discarding all the information received that is not meaningful. And this is a very fundamental process in biology. And this is the way that preferred lower level elements are created out of an ensemble of stuff, a lot of which you don't want. An example which will be familiar to all is incoming emails. You delete the ones you don't want and you keep the ones you do want. And that's the way you create an ordered set of emails out of a disordered set. You select what is meaningful and you discard that which is not. Now, the classic case here is Darwinian selection. The environment tells the animal what is a preferred state or not, and this leads to a preferred DNA sequence through the well-established processes of Darwinian evolution. And so this polar bear is told that its fur should be white because that's good for it because it's living in the polar environment. A brown bear is basically told through Darwinian processes over a long time that brown fur is better for it. This is top-down causation because if you change the result is different. So this guy's white environment is going away because of global climate change, and it's no longer going to be good for it to live in that environment. This process of Darwinian selection alters the genes, which change the material stuff, the proteins which make up its fur at the molecular level. So what is happening is the ecological context is changing the coding in the DNA molecules at the detail level. This is the double helix with its complementary baked pairs, and basically I'm saying downward causation is taking place from the ecology to this level, and that is material causation because it's changing the material at the bottom level, namely the fur, and that is dependent on the proteins out of which the animal is made. So that's absolutely fundamental. And the final kind of one I want to talk about is neuronal plasticity is developed adaptively. What happens is again, from Lewis Wolpert, births are born isolated from each other. Axons and dendrites initially connect in a random kind of way. Synaptic connections are made and then they are refined as the initial set of relatively non-specific synaptic connections are refined to produce a precise pattern as we interact with the environment. Basically, our brains detect certain patterns, and those patterns then strengthen certain of the neuronal connections and say it's better to delete other ones, and that is what is happening there. So this kind of refinement takes place in all processes involving neuroplasticity. It's adaptively guided by neurotransmitters through the functioning of the value system of Gerald Edelman, which is neural Darwinism. We could talk about that at some length. So my point here is that random connections in the brain are refined according to experience, and then they result in a brain which is fitted to the environment around you. It remembers some things and doesn't remember other things. And that is what was discovered by the Nobel Prize winner, Eric Kandel. So in this case, the lower level elements are the connections between the synapses, the details of the connections, and they are shaped at the macro level by things you see, like you see a car accident, and that changes the connections at the micro level in your brain. And so that's downward causation from the psychological level of seeing a motor car accident to detailed connections in the brains. So that's material causation. Then Aristotle talked about final causation, which is the reason that things happens. And this is the teleological issue of functional purpose, which is the core of all life. All life and its components have a purpose or function. Now, physics is unable to comprehend the idea of purpose or function. But the higher level or the teleological issue, the functional purpose, shapes higher level dynamics and therefore entrains lower level dynamics via downward causation. All four kinds of causation are needed to determine specific outcomes in social contexts, which is the context within which the brain functions. Without taking them all into account, one cannot account even for the existence of a teapot. Now, function is hierarchically structured both logically and physically. So logically, I want to bake a cake, so I need the ingredients to make the cake, so I must catch the bus to go to the shop to buy them. So I must walk to the bus stop to be there by 10 a.m. and so on. So when you have your purpose or function in your mind, the higher level here is I want to bake a cake. Well, as a higher level, I want to entertain my cousin or something like that. The purpose chains down through a hierarchy of high level to lower level purposes. Physically, a plan is formed in my head. Action potential spike stains are flowing in the axons which represent this plan. Ions are flowing in and out of the axons, which enable the spike chains to go. Voltage-gated ion channels are opening and closing to enable that to take place. Electrons and protons are attracting each other to enable that to take place. So the plan chains down. It's a two-way thing. The plan initially, these things are going up into the start of the plan. You then think about it, you change your mind, that changes down, and it's a circular causation which is taking place as the plan is formed and then shapes how the electrons and protons are going between each other. And it's all driven by my purpose of making a cake. So the purpose of making a cake with the higher level purpose of entertaining my cousin is going down and shaping what happens at lower levels. And that the final causation here is the plan which you have. Key point, ethics, values, and morality are the highest level in this case of values of final causation. The highest level of intention, values, and ethics is causally effective. What your ethical system is, your system of values is the choice of criteria for what are acceptable goals at lower levels. And so it controls all the lower level goal choices. So your ethics and values change down to shape what your sociology of your society is, your psychology, physiology, biochemistry, through down to the physics. Options are shaped by ethical standpoints and values. They act down to guide all outcomes. For instance, if you think it's okay to steal, that's part of your society's values. You will choose certain values which involving stealing. That will involve your arms moving in certain ways, enabled by the biochemistry, the organic chemistry, physical chemistry, physics, because your ethics says it's okay to steal. And so that shapes the lower level things that are taking place. That's a fundamental part of what's taking place. And so final causation shapes all the lower things that happen. If your society says it's okay to have nuclear weapons and to use them on other societies, that will reshape physics at the lower level because your values have said this is okay. And so this is how final causation is crucially important in the real world. Now, the final one, which Aristotle did not talk about, is abstract causation. This occurs when intelligent life arises. We use statistics and understanding of physical laws to predict future events and choose paths towards optimal outcomes. So we have designed products such as teapots and aircraft. We use computer algorithms to shape commerce and engineering. We prescribe rules of games to determine legal plays. We legislate laws to specify allowed behavior. For example, the invention of the closed corporation changed the life of humanity, as Yuval Harari explains in his book Sapiens. All of these causal features, plans, algorithms are abstract, but they are still causally efficacious. So the crucial point here is that abstract elements could be causally effective. Here's a Pilates class. The teacher has an idea or purpose in her mind, which results in an exercise plan. This is an abstract thing. This results in instructions to the pupil, which results in intentions in her mind. That results in going down to muscles, motions, and so on. And so the result of particular motions that come from the purpose and the exercise plan. Excuse me. The flow of causation is the molecules and the muscles move according to the planned and the instructor's mind. It's top-down causation from a concept to motions of electrons in the muscles. The electrons don't cause this to take place, they enable this. Aircraft design. Plans for a jumbo jet aircraft result in billions of atoms being deployed to create the aircraft in accordance with those plans. It's a non-trivial example. It costs a great deal of money to employ experts in aerodynamics, structures, materials, fuse, lubrication controls to design and manufacture the aircraft. The plan is not equivalent to any single person's brain state. It's an abstract, hierarchically structured equivalent class of representations, spoken, drawn in computers and brains and so on, that together comprise the design. It's not a physical thing, but it's clearly causally effective. The aircraft wouldn't exist without the plan. The crucial part of the plan actually is the one in a computer, because that controls computer-aided design systems. So the existence of this aircraft is the result of abstract causation. This is enabled by the power of equations we have articulated in our mind using engineering designs. And so, in fact, equations change the world. So physics theory, such as Maxwell's equation of electromagnetism, which is an abstract entity, the equations are abstract, described by Maxwell's equation, led to the development of radios, cell phones, TV, and so on. It is this theory, Maxwell's theory, is shown to be true by experiments and by its technological outcomes. Maxwell's theory is not the same as any single person's brain. It can be represented in many ways in many formalisms, and this abstract theory has altered physical configurations in the real world and hence is causally effective, because Maxwell's theory, through Maxwell and then through other people like Tesla and Edison and so on, resulted in the existence of iPhones, cell phones, TVs, and all the rest of them. So Maxwell's theory is a high-level causal factor which cannot be derived by coarse graining in a lower-level variables. And this is a proof of how non-physical entities can have enormous causal power. These are the equations which led to the existence of the iPhone and all the rest of them. And then another very nice example is the causal power of the rules of chess. Now, the rules of chess are abstract again, and they were developed through a historical process of determining what's the best rule for chess. People tried various rules. The rules of chess are abstract, but they shape what happens at this level because they determine what's an allowed and what's a not allowed rule. And so I have this vision of the Martian arriving and observing for a while, turning over the pieces, not seeing anything, lifting up the board, not seeing anything, and then deciding there is a physics force field which causes these pieces to move in particular ways. It's not a force field in a physics sense, and it's abstract agreement between people. Now, how can this arise out of physics? And this is an absolutely fundamental point. At the molecular level, there's what's called the molecular storm. Billions and billions of molecules are bumping into each other in the molecular level I showed in that hierarchy. Genes are stochastic in various ways. Gene reproduction is stochastic to a certain level. And in fact, when genes are reproduced, there's an unacceptable level of randomness. But that gets corrected by incredible mechanisms which correct for errors and make the gene reproduction much more precise, but it still contains errors, and that is what allows adaptive selection to take place. It's the molecular storm which allows the molecular process of molecular recognition to take place, and random neural connections allow refinement to give the desired connections, and action potential spike chains have got random in this. All of biology has got random in this, and this allows choices between options. The moral from this is not that the outcomes of biology are random, it is that the randomness at the bottom level allows that adaptive selection process to take place, and that allows high levels to select desired outcomes and discard the rest. So agency can in this way arise from the underlying physics, and my colleagues Dennis Noble and Ray Noble have written about this in ways which make this clear, how stochasticity allows agency because it decouples biology from the inexorable outcome of the Laplacian determinism. That is undone by the molecular storm, by the stochasticity of genes, by the randomness of neural connections, by the randomness in action potential spice chains. And so, and then finally, circular causality takes place between higher and lower levels. And that allows causal closure to take place. And that causal closure enables higher level intentions to determine lower level outcomes. And this is the very important way that this works. So the big picture taken together, this forms a kind of basis, for justification of the anti-materialist work of the Galileo Commission. It's a solid rebuttal to scientism and materialism as such. It confirms that in terms of the Galileo report, science 1 is not the same as science 2. Now notice, I have not tried to deal with the hard problem of consciousness. In my view, present-day science does not know how to deal with the hard problem of consciousness. We do not even know how to begin to approach the topic from a purely scientific viewpoint. In particular, we have nothing to say solid about its relation to the underlying ontology of the universe and of what exists. So science is not able to say anything at the moment about the hard problem of consciousness, despite what some peoples will tell you, and we do not have any idea how consciousness relates to ontology of the universe. That is a subject which science at the present time cannot say. Until we do, I am unable to comment on what I've been stating, what my above viewpoint may say about near-death experiences, parapsychology, and transcendent experiences. I don't have, on the basis of what I've been saying, it sorts out the issue of the anti-materialist work. It's a solid rebuttal to scientism and materialism. It doesn't resolve in any way these kind of issues. However, of course, any careful experiment evidence in this regard must clearly be taken seriously and used to guide our theoretical constraints. There are good grounds to believe in abstract entities underlying the universe, possibility spaces, and I could talk about that a bit. And that supports the idea of transcendent existence, but it doesn't solve these kind of issues. So to start to wrap up, causation and realization, emergence goes from the lower levels to the cellular levels to the psychological levels. Realization goes downwards and shapes what happens at those levels. Same level causation happens at every level and is causally effective at every level. The fact that psychology is based in physics does not prevent psychological causation taking place. The fact that physics underlies physiology doesn't prevent causality taking place at that level. There's real causation at this level and so on. And this is the picture I've tried to present to you. Physicists are focused on efficient causation, and even then they tend to regard it as only happening at the basic applied physics level. However, in the real world, efficient causation applies at each emergent level. For example, psychological causation is just as real as physical causation at the micro level. The emergence of genuine causal powers at high levels is enabled by a mixture of upwards and downward causation, where the latter takes place via both material causation in the Aristotelian sense and formal causation in the Aristotelian sense, as I have tried to explain. In the social context that is the framework of our lives, all of this is guided by final causation, by what we choose to do, which then chains down and shapes all that happens at lower levels. Additionally, there is the further key kind of causation not characterized by Aristotle, namely abstract causation. And that certainly takes place, there's no doubt about it, and that simply proves that materialism is wrong, because abstract entities can cause things, and consciousness is, of course, a contentious example. What I should have made a more about is that abstract causation takes place. Sorry, abstract causation takes place by algorithms. Algorithms takes place all the time, and in the social. Yeah, sorry, at this level, I should have said more about how algorithms are changing everything all the place. And in the present day, algorithms are a classic case of abstract causation, which is without any doubt whatever causally effective. So this is a summary of what I've been saying about efficient causation takes place at every level. Genuine causal is enabled by formal and material causation, as I indicated. In the social context, this is all guided by final causation. And then there is the further kind of causation, which is not characterized by Aristotle, namely abstract causation. And sorry, I got slightly mixed up at that point. I lost my place, but now this is clearly the way what I wanted to say to you. And so I will stop sharing my screen and return to our host.
Thank you very much indeed, George. That was a tour de force, and I'm sure actually Aristotle would approve your extra category of causation rather than reducing it all down to efficient causation, which what scientists have tried to do, as you've demonstrated. And I thought that was a very good piece of what Mary Midgley would call philosophical plumbing. In other words, you've analyzed these different levels and shown how they actually work in a very, very clear way. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting questions coming up. Indeed, in the chat, and feel free, everybody, to put put some questions in the chat as well. Let's just take, that's someone. Yes, there's one. I'll take a couple of questions, and I'll come to you, Jean. Does downward? No, please explain why you don't include abstract causation under formal causation. That's a good question, I think.
Formal causation. It's enabled by formal causation. What I should have said is that abstract causation is it's a specific kind of efficient causation. Actually, if you want to relate it to the other ones, it's efficient causation at the psychological level. So abstract causation is a form of efficient causation taking place at the psychological level. And it is enabled by consciousness because it wouldn't occur without consciousness. And as I've said, I am not claiming to understand how consciousness arises. It is enabled by brain states. And your report has a very interesting discussion about consciousness and so on. I regard the hard problem of consciousness as unsolved and possibly even unsolvable. So what I should have said, yes, is that abstract causation is a specific kind of efficient causation at the psychological level, is what I should have said.
Okay, but it's useful to bracket it out in the sense that it has a very sort of distinctive function. What about Libet? What do you think of this? Doesn't it Libet's experiments, which show changes in motor areas of the brain before awareness of a decision, challenge the model that mental states cause neuronal changes?
Libet has been analyzed by many people, and the one who I particularly like is Merlin Donald, who's a wonderful psychologist in Canada who wrote a book called A Mind So Rare. And what he comments on is that Libet's experiments is a highly artificial context. The real choice, the real conscious choice took place when people agreed to take part in Libet's experiment. That's where the real freedom took place. The fact of our choices and what we do at a certain level is, of course, enabled by these spike chains moving through our brain, which takes time, and its interaction between different brain areas. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I think a serious analysis of Libet says that the real freedom didn't take place at all. When you want to talk about freedom of choice, the real freedom took place when people agreed to take place in these highly artificial experiments in the first place.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. And actually, Dennis Alexander, in one of his books, he gives a much better context for it when he talks about making a difficult decision. That you've got these different possibilities, and you reflect on these possibilities, and then you, for various reasons of argumentation, which would fit into your abstract causation idea, then you make one decision or the other. And to say that it's determined by brain processes seems rather naive and a category error at the wrong level.
Yeah. Sorry, Karen?
Carry on. No, carry on. Then we'll have Jean.
There is something I saw. I saw a brief thing floating past from Brian Josephson about how does abstract causation take place, and that's a very interesting point because we've been brainwashed by Chomsky into thinking of language is taking place on the basis of a series of rules. Now, language is not a rule-based system, despite everything which Chomsky has said. Our brains are pattern recognition systems. They are based in Bayes' rule and in statistical recognition of patterns. And a very, very interesting question is, how does it happen that our brains are able to perform logical calculations when that's not the way that they're naturally constructed? They're naturally constructed as recognizing rules. And in the end, I think the answer is that we eventually can recognize the rules of an abstract logical system, such as the rules of chess or the rules of mathematics and so on. But that is something which I don't think has been explored nearly enough, which is how a brain, which is basically a pattern recognition statistical system, can be trained to recognize and then use very, very logical abstract rules in a logical based way, like logicians do, and like their pure mathematicians do, and in a less rigorous way, how theoretical physicists do it. There's a hierarchy of logical rigor which goes down there. I'm a theoretical physicist, not a logician or a pure mathematician, and our brains can be trained to operate in a logical manner, or even though that's not their natural way of thinking. And I think that's an important statement.
Well, I see Brian has actually appeared live, so I'll just go to him before you, Jean, as I think
Hi, Brian, welcome.
This may be relevant to the current topic. So you should be able to unmute, Brian.
Right. Well, I think there's a physical process which is connecting vibrations with other systems, and that's what coding and language is all about. In fact, there's something called cymatics, which where you actually apply vibrations to water, say, and that builds structures. So in other words, it's a general physical process that we're concerned with here.
Well, there are vibrations in the sense that there are reentrant neural connections which set up temporary oscillatory structures, and these code thoughts. And one of the big things we simply do not understand about the brain, apart from the hard problem of consciousness, which we have no idea to do, we do not have in any kind of serious way a mapping between action potential spike chains and thoughts, or between the connections. And there's a lot of nonsense spoken in by some people about brain imaging, about how brain imaging can tell us what people's thoughts. We're nowhere near being able to do that. We have no idea how the recurrent oscillatory circuits code thoughts. And I agree with what Brian says, that it's oscillations which are taking place, but what the coding is, we have no idea.
Yeah, well, it isn't the thing I know anything about at all, but people quote someone called Walter Freeman as having had some great ideas. I don't know if you're...
I would be very happy to be given some references to check on that. I would be delighted to see that.
Okay, I gather he's got some pretty deep thinking, and perhaps that helps.
Well, one of the things I should briefly have mentioned, I didn't include that because one can't deal with everything. Crucial in downward causation is a multiple representation at lower levels. If you have a simple thing at a higher level, like a bear is going to have white fur, as you go down to the genetic level, there are hundreds of millions of ways you can code that at genetic level. One thing at the top level, it's the same with thoughts. It's well known with neural networks that having a certain pattern in a neural network, you train a neural network, it can be realized in many, many different patterns of connection at the lower levels. And it's in fact a characterization of top-down causation, that a single higher level entity can be represented, realized in many, many ways at the lower levels. And there's a wonderful book about this by a guy called Andreas Wagner called Arrival of the Fittest. And he talks about how the genotype to phenotype map is an incredibly degenerate map, And that is what resolves what is otherwise a very, very difficult problem in evolutionary theory, namely within the time available, how we explored the space of proteins to arrive at the ones which work. And anyhow, I don't want to go on about that, but it's just a point to bear in mind. In the downward mappings which occur, there's a huge degeneracy that a single higher level state can be represented in an enormous number of ways at lower levels. And that's actually a really important point in what's going on.
Thank you very much.
Something else which I probably shouldn't take over this, but I'll just mention some in coordination dynamics, which I think deals with these kind of issues. But I'll stop talking there.
Okay, thanks very much, Brian. Jean, I will go to you, which will be coming from a different angle, I suspect.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm interested in the history of all of this, because when I was at medical school in Edinburgh, I graduated in 1965. We heard all of this stuff from below up. And I'm just curious to know when the up-down part of it started, who were the major people that introduced that, because to think that way at all, I mean, you were just shot down when I was at medical school. So I'm curious to know who are the pioneers of this top-down business, because it's radical. I've never heard this before.
Are you talking about in the brain or more generally?
I mean, just historically, who are the people that started thinking down, top-down instead? Because everybody was thinking, when I was trained, we're coming from down up. So who are the top-downer people?
Okay, well, in general terms, in evolutionary theory, there was a guy called Campbell who talked about this very beautifully, because in fact, the evolution is clearly downward, and Campbell, Donald Campbell, wrote an article which I can give a reference to if you want to spread it, talking about the mandibles of ants and how the mandible of ants have got a specific structure which enables them to give a very, very strong pincer movement, which enables them to fight and to beat off. So the guy called Donald Campbell. In terms of the brain, it started off with perception. And Richard Gregory was the person who talked a lot about this. And then a lot of people started looking at visual illusions in the brain and things like that, and how they indicated that downward causation was taking in the brain. This has then become a major movement in recent years. Carl Friston at University College London has started, a guy who was in Edinburgh, Andy Clark, and a group of people like that. Andy Clark has got a wonderful paper you can download called Whatever Next. So download Andy Clark's paper called Whatever Next and the commentary on it, in which he talks about a re-evaluation of the way neuroscience works in terms of predictive coding, and the way the brain is always predicting what should happen. And the way perception works is that the optic nerve does not connect directly through to the visual cortex. It goes to the thalamus, and in the thalamus, what happens is the incoming nerve, incoming signal is compared with a prediction of what ought to be seen. And in fact, what your brain sees, what you see, using the word see, is not the same as the incoming signal. It's what the brain thinks you ought to be seeing. And that is the basis of great many visual illusions. And it is the reason why it is so difficult for you to proofread an article you've read, because when you're reading the article, you see the brain sees what the brain thinks ought to be there, not what is actually there. And that is a crucial reason why proofreading is so difficult. So look up the article by Andy Clark called Whatever Next, and some of the writing by Carl Friston at University College London about this, and a guy called Jacob Hoey, Hohwy, who are all writing about predictive coding and how that is the way, and a guy called Anil Seth down at Sussex, and how they are writing a lot of stuff about downward causation in the brain in this way.
Maybe you could just put it not in the recording follow-up, George. I'll ask you maybe to give us 4 or 5 references like that.
Yeah,
it'd be very helpful. I would add two things, one trivial and the other not. The non-trivial one is a book that really introduced me to this idea was Science and Moral Priority by Roger Sperry. And he goes into downward causation, partly in relation to your ethical ideas. But I thought that was a really quite a major statement and certainly influenced the way I thought about these things. And then the trivial thing that I've discovered is that when I was working in a bank in the 1970s, when we were checking documents, we used to read them out to each other.
Yes.
And I've discovered that by reading out loud something you're trying to prove, you'll notice things
Yes.
that you wouldn't notice if you were just reading it silently, as you were saying just now.
Okay, but now there's a very interesting thing, the process of reading. When you read, you see what you think ought to be there, not what is there. And Kenneth Goodman and colleagues in Arizona in the United States have done some very interesting experiments where they get people to read a text and they compare what the people actually say with what the text actually says. And this is what they call miscue analysis. And what they find is that people substitute words which are not the same as the written words, but which have the same meaning. So they might read, a man walked down the street, and what the person will speak, well, that's the text, and the person will say, a fellow walked down the street, something like that. And it's actually quite fun to do that, to get someone and to get them to read a text and to compare the precise words with what the guys actually say. And this gives you, again, a proof of this kind of thing. But also a guy called Dale Purves has got a book called about visual illusions, and I could give a reference to that book. And the basis of all visual illusions, of which there are a wonderful set of visual illusions, is again, it's because your brain is not conveying in a precise way. There isn't the homunculus receiving directly the incoming light. It's that your brain is interpreting what ought to be there, and that's the basis of visual illusions.
And is that, I haven't actually read this book yet, but there's a recent book by Donald Hoffman. Is that part of what he's saying, or
by who?
I do not know it either. Donald Hoffman.
I haven't seen that one.
No, I will let you know what that one is. It's up in my writer's hut. Let's take Paul Harrison's question next. Does abstract causation, which derives from consciousness, ultimately drive all levels of causation, and hence can be seen as creating the reality we experience?
Well, at a certain level, this is obviously so. If you just look around you, you're all sitting in rooms which have been designed by human beings. You're using computers which have been designed by human beings. There's multiple levels of causation taking that, because nowadays a computer chip is designed by a computer. So the computer is designing its chip by abstract causation, and that chip is then enabling the computer to design further things. So there's multiple levels of abstract causation taking place there. Yeah, so the computer is designing things through algorithms, and algorithms is the embodiment of abstract causation, and they are changing the world around us. They are changing social relationships through the way that they are shaping what happens on Facebook and Twitter and all of these things, as we've seen in the recent United States elections. And in fact, abstract causation is interfering with this final causation in a profound kind of way, because the algorithms are embodying values in them in a most crucial kind of way. And the values they're embodying is that the person who created the algorithms should get as much money as they can by getting as much clicks on their Facebook pages as they can and their Twitter pages. And this is literally what is driving a lot of what's happening in the physical world. And that's abstract causation in the sense that the values of the people who design the algorithms are shaping that. That's abstract, and that's changing the algorithms, and that's shaping what happens in Facebook and Twitter and so on, and that's changing physical relationships in the world. So this is a pretty good example.
Very interesting. I mean, obviously, as you say, that anything that's designed, I'm I'm actually sitting at a desk which was designed by my grandfather, and
Yeah.
so that began as a design or concept in his mind.
The whole of the built environment is designed. Yeah.
And exactly.
Incidentally, Yuval Harari, I know one might treat some of what he says with some skepticism, but he's actually very good on this kind of thing. And one of the most important things he latches on is the idea of a closed corporation. And he talks about the Renault company. What is the Renault company? It's not the factory, it's not the person and so on. It actually is embodied in the deeds of incorporation, which makes it what it is. And a closed corporation like that it's not a physical entity, it's an abstract entity. And another example I like is a book. In the old days, you would say a book is this thing between two covers, but then you say, well, is it the same if I change the typeface? Yeah. Is it the same if it's a big book or a small book? I've got a big book for blind people. But then you said, well, okay, now I've got an audio book. Is that still the same book? And now I've got it on Kindle. Is that the same book? And in the end, the answer is the book. The entity is an abstract entity which is represented in a variety of different ways. And that's the idea of multiple representation. The thing is the abstract entity, and all of those representations are different realizations of the single abstract entity.
Very good. Thank you. We've got a question from Jens Allwood, who I know is a philosopher. Plato and Aristotle disagreed on whether form could be separated from matter. What is your view? Rather big philosophical.
Well, if the abstract representation thing says yes, they can be separated from matter. Oh, sorry. Well, hang on. It depends what you mean there. There's firstly, we've got Turing and the fact that a computation can take place on many different kinds of forms. It doesn't matter what the realization of the computation is. Now, is that what we're talking about, or something different? No, the question was, tell me the question again.
It's what is your view on whether form could be separated from matter? I don't know if he's also getting at the archetype.
Form at a certain level is an abstract thing. It's a geometrical question. So, for instance, those biomolecules, the form can be described in an abstract way. They're incredibly complicated forms, those biomolecules. But in the end, to be causally effective in the physical world, they must be realized in some kind of matter. So the form is abstract, but its realization is physical.
Thank you. Someone has just pointed out that Donald Hoffman's actually on the call. And so he might, Don, if I unmute you, you might want to make an observation. And I'm sorry, I haven't yet read your book. Sorry, yes.
Yes, I would agree that what George was saying about perception, that it's viewed now by the experts in the field that there's a lot of top-down causation, that we see what we expect, that we have Bayesian inference kinds of rules, but the Bayesian inference requires priors, and those priors are what you are expecting. And so in many cases, you see what you expect, absolutely.
Thank you. I'd be very interested to look at your book. It sounds fascinating. I want to see that.
Right, there I look at the issue of evolution and perception, and the question there is whether evolution shapes sensory systems of organisms to see whatever true structures there might be in reality. It turns out that it's a theorem of evolution by natural selection that the probability is 0 that any sensory system has ever been shaped to see any true structure of reality.
Okay, I'd like to see that.
Yeah. Can you remind us well, I haven't got the book down here, Don. Can you remind us the title of your book?
It's called The Case Against Reality, Why Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes.
Right, excellent. Well, we'll maybe have a separate session on
it sounds as if it's a little bit in opposition to Dale Purv's book. You must have read Dale Purv's book.
Well, yeah, it's an opposition to a main theme actually in perception research, that evolution has shaped our sensory systems to show us truths, the truths that we need to survive. And what we show is that actually is goes against evolution with natural selection. It's a theorem of that theory that we're shaped to have adaptive perceptions, period, not true perceptions.
Okay, I'll have to read your book and try to get to grips with that.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Dick. Yes.
I'm rather hesitant being in such august company. You'll probably laugh at me, but what exactly are algorithms?
An algorithm is a rule, a very, very precise rule, whereby you have a set of variables and you start with an initial state, and given the values of the variables, on that basis, you calculate the next state. This is what Alan Turing laid out very precisely, but in the old days, the computers were women. There was a room full of women sitting at desks, and each of them had a sheet of paper in front of them and a rule, and the paper would have a number or a set of numbers on them, and they would have a rule: do this to the numbers, like it might be add the two numbers and get a result, and then pass it to your table on your left. And then they get a sheet of paper from the person on the right. It would say add them, and so on. And another person, the rule will be multiply them, and another person, the rule will be divide them, and so on. And so you had basically, before Alan Turing computers, they were doing astronomical calculations, for instance, and they would the algorithm was simply saying, you've got these two numbers, your task is to do this rule and then pass it on. The more difficult one is a branching one. Say, if the value is this, then do that. If it's something else, do something else. So the rule might be, if the value is greater than 10, add them. If the value is less than 10, divide them. And so this is the kind of where branching comes in. And branching algorithms, at a certain level of the core of what happens in biology, or at each level in biology, the organism is comparing variables and branching what happens. So for instance, in those voltage gated ion channels, if the voltage is above a certain level, let a molecule through. If it's less than a certain level, don't let it through. And at a synapse, if the total voltage coming through is above a level, open the synapse, send off an action potential. If it's less, do not set it off. So all of biology is based in these kind of branching logical stuff taking place all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I see we've got Jeffrey from the Resonance Academy. I don't know whether you'd like to say anything in relation to what you just put in the chat. I'll just unmute you, and then we'll come to you, Shantina.
Well, welcome. I didn't expect to be here, but yes. Well, I've been following the work of Nassim Haramein now for many, many years, and watched him come to a mathematical solution for the unified physics of, and his final paper should be out soon, that will pretty much open the lid on the casket to return the ether to the collective consciousness of humanity. And the foundation is geometric. So the field or the ether has a mathematical solution that's geometric and based on the Planck spherical unit, and all the math comes out for beautifully. So the papers are available. I'm excited about the new one coming out, but you will now have a mathematical solution for everything you've been discussing here, underlying the fabric of space-time or space memory.
Thanks very much indeed. So that's in the chat for anybody who wants to follow that up. Yeah, then we're going to Shantina, who actually only just arrived, but he's already got a question. I've asked you to unmute. Are you okay?
Yeah. Sorry about coming in late, actually, a minute ago. Yeah. Well, first a comment on Don Hoffman book, which is absolutely fascinating. I read it and reread it, and challenging and provocative, and like one wonder. I would like to see the mathematical proof of this statement, but the book is like the the essence of the argument is very tight and solid, I feel. Anyway, and to George Ellis, I would like to ask a question which maybe you've dealt with it before while I was not here, but from a phenomenological point of view, matter is not like a direct object of experience. It's a construct that makes sense of our perceptions. So you could say matter is structure in perception or structure in consciousness. Would you agree with a statement like that?
Our experience of matter is a structure in our consciousness. I don't think that tells us what the actual nature of matter is, which is, of course, a highly complex matter to do with the nature of quantum field theory, and maybe with string theory or M theory. So the nature of matter is one kind of thing from a scientific viewpoint, from the physics viewpoint. Our mental view of matter is certainly a construct of our senses. And the relation between them is limited by our senses and by the measuring machines which we have available. So I don't think that our senses directly give us any information on the ontological nature of matter, because quantum theory, you have to go down to the micro level to quantum theory, and at that level, quantum field theory or quantum theory per se says you've got wave-particle duality. Quantum field theory talks about vibrations of the vacuum and so on.
No, I agree with you.
It's all very complicated. I don't think human senses give us a direct link into this.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, my statement is rather the opposite of that. It's like what we can confidently say is only our experience of the world. The world, matter, and everything is a construct by which we make sense, or maybe Don Hoffman would say we use to survive. It's a certain structure of our experience which is useful for living.
And which is culturally obviously influenced as well, because one of your expertises is in the Chinese view, which is very different from the Western view.
Yes, different styles of structure making.
Yes, yes, good. Jens, you asked the question on Plato and Aristotle, but you're looking for a clarification, maybe.
No, I'm not. I'm asking a different question.
Ah, okay.
I'm looking for a clarification of the 5 concepts of causality that we have been treated to. So it seems that efficient cause works on its own levels. So yes, psychological things can
at each level there's efficient cause.
While the other 4 seem not to work on their own levels, they seem to work upward or downward. Is that correct? So that
is correct. Yes.
Yeah. So they are quite different from each other. And as my previous question on Plato and Aristotle and form and matter suggested, maybe form and matter distinction is also somewhat different from the others. So that actually the 5 types of causality have fairly different status. Would you agree?
Yes, I think they do have different status. The battle which I've been fighting with some colleagues like Dennis Noble is some physicists who have denied that downward causation is possible. And Brian Greene is an example, Carlo Rovelli is an example, and so on. And we have been fighting to make the case that not only that it's possible, but it's as crucial in biology and in the brain. The different kinds of causation are of different status, and what we're thinking is that physicists are simply not taking all the possible kinds of causation that occurs into account. They stick to the causation they know well, which is efficient causation at the bottom physics level. That's the one that they know well. That's what they stick with. Whereas, for instance, I'll tell you an interesting kind of thing. Francis Crick had this famous statement, "You, your joys, your sorrows, and so on, are nothing but the interaction of genes and neurons," or some statement a bit like that. Now, the fascinating thing about that is, from the viewpoint of a physicist like Carlo Rovelli, genes and neurons are nothing but the interactions of electrons and protons and so on. And so if you are strictly take seriously what Brian Greene says or Carlo Rovelli, then the interactions of neurons and genes, which Francis Crick was talking about in his book on the grain, those are just epiphenomena as well. You can't have it both ways. So basically the statement which Francis Crick was making when he was talking about, he was trying to say that higher level neural activity was nothing but the interaction of genes and neurons. If you make that statement, you can you cannot. But if you are a physical reductionist, you say that the level that Francis Crick was talking about isn't real. It's an epiphenomenon, and basically, and it's similarly that Francis Crick, when he was dealing with DNA and RNA, he thought that interaction at that molecular level was real. It wasn't an epiphenomenon. Our claim is that the interaction at each of those levels is real. At the psychological level, it's real. Your joys, your sorrows, and so on are real. At the genetic and molecular level, they're real. That's only possible if top-down action takes place from the one to the other and goes down and controls what happens at the electron and proton level. And that's the battle which we have been fighting.
But do you think you're making progress?
I think we are. I think we are. I have an amazing colleague in America that I'm writing a paper with about this, who's talking about biological developmental processes. And this is an absolutely fascinating area, the way I very briefly mentioned it. When a body is created, you start off with a single cell. They start doubling and doubling and doubling, and you get exponential growth. Each cell is the same. They start off identical. And then each of them has to be told where to go in the body, and that happens by positional information. The positional information is a top-down effect from basically an abstract plan of what the animal ought to be, telling each cell what to become, and it creates it creates the segmentation in a Drosophila fly. It creates our backbones and so on. And once you start looking at this, it starts to actually change the way you think. And Sean Carroll, who is one of these physical hardliners, has been shaken to the roots by having an interaction with Michael Levin, who's this wonderful biologist who does work in developmental biology. And Sean Carroll has had to start rethinking his claim that there is no top-down causation in the real physical world. So I think we are making progress, although there's some hardliners who are very hardline reductionists. Basically, there's a huge psychological thing that their whole life has been based in that bottom line understanding, and there's a major psychological barrier in them changing the way that they think.
Yeah, I think that's true. Jens, I think you wanted to come back with an extra supplementary.
So I interpret your answer to make this interpretation possible. The other four causes, other than efficient cause, create the conditions for the working of efficient cause.
That's precisely correct. Yeah, that's precisely correct.
Okay, so that's good. So they are very different from efficient cause, one might say.
Yes, they're different from efficient cause, but efficient cause can't work unless the conditions are right for it to take place.
Right.
And so
They are like
the others are crucial to the real world.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a very useful piece of clarification. Well, I'm glad to hear that you think you're making progress, because I think that so much of what one reads in textbooks, and I remember learning about this in the history of Western philosophy when Bertrand Russell, in the section on Aristotle, is just nothing like as sophisticated. And what I found really appreciated about your presentation, George, is the illustrations that you gave along the way, which I think give a very clear idea of exactly what you're talking about. It's not just an abstract, but you can see it actually in action and how it makes a lot more sense.
Well, the thing is, I think dealing with biological reality, it's one of the most extraordinary things. The most extraordinary statement is that biology is literally based in the shape of biomolecules, and specifically the shape of proteins and of RNA and DNA. It's a most extraordinary statement. And I think in terms of philosophy, I think there's a lot of philosophers who've been beaten by physicists. In fact, I know one or two of them. And the philosophers say, well, look, we don't want to think this way, but the physicists are telling us this is the way it is. And so we have to believe the physicists because they've got all the data. But a lot of the physicists have got tunnel vision. They only see the physics level. They do not see the higher levels. And so I think philosophers must fight back and say, but you aren't the only scientists in the world. What about developmental biologists? What about psychologists who are looking at perception? And they also are doing solid experiments and so on. And they are also finding out how things work.
Absolutely. I'm sure almost everybody on this call will agree. I was going to, Rupert was on the call. I was going to ask him to comment on morphogenetic fields, but he's gone now, so we can't bring that in. So I think we'll bring the very stimulating afternoon/early evening, depending on where you're located.